In this video, we're going to look at over 30 tests using companions with different weapon loadouts to see which to use and which to avoid. There's a ton to cover here, so let's dive right in. For the first test, we equip everyone with a shield and a tier 6 one-handed sword, with 86 cut damage, one of the best. To keep things even, we mimic the AI behavior, match their line width, and give the charge command. We'll be facing off against the best infantry in the game, the Imperial Legionary, who use a one-handed mace. The scrum is fairly even at the start, with both sides taking losses, but our companions pull ahead and keep a sizable lead till the end. We lose only 10 companions in the end, killing all 21 enemies. Next up, we replace the one-handed sword with a one-handed axe, with 82 cut damage, and repeat the battle. It's difficult to see what's actually going on since the battle turns into a mosh pit, but it's clear the axes are holding up better than the one-handed sword. In the end, only 7 companions were lost. And since we're fighting against heavy armor, we swap out for a one-handed mace with 71 blunt damage. Immediately we see a huge difference. It's mostly green in the kill feed, and the enemy gets stomped in under a minute. We lose only 4 companions this time, getting even better results. And now for the grand disappointment, one-handed spears. This one does 37 pierce damage and has 216 length, so it's quite good. Unfortunately, we see massive problems. Our companions cannot land solid hits on the enemy because they are aggressively closing the distance, and our polearms are too long to use at that range. Even when they do land hits, they mostly bounce off like nothing happened. We managed a single kill, but lose all 21 companions. Before we move on to two-handed weapons, let's do a quick recap of this section. Clearly, polearms should be avoided at all costs when going up against high-skill, well-armored opponents on foot. Any of the other one-handed options can work, but the one-handed mace produces the best results. Let's try the polearm again, but drop the shield and pick up more damage. 42 pierce in this case, with 299 length. Since the enemy was aggressively pushing last time, we give the fallback command in hopes of getting hits while slowly pulling back. It works for a couple seconds, but then they get overwhelmed. We don't even manage a single kill this time. For the next test, I picked a two-handed sword that has comparable damage to the Falks and only gives up the shield bonus damage, which is rarely a factor for the AI. Our companions get off to a great start and don't have any issues bypassing the enemy shield. They push hard and overwhelm the Legionary, losing only 3 by the end. Now let's try one of my favorite two-handed axes. 138 cut damage with 121 length. These things are beasts on the field, even able to one-tap a Legionary right from the start. The increased length allows them to manage distance well, and the battle ends with only a single companion lost. I wasn't able to get my smithing mod working, so I found a two-handed bill hook that has comparable stats to the top-tier crafted two-handed mace. This one does 95 blunt damage with 138 length. The enemy gets a lucky hit in the opening hits of the battle, but it's pretty obvious they are outmatched by our blunt weapons. In the end, we lose only 2 companions. Now for the big daddy of them all, the two-handed glaive. This thing hits for 182 damage and has a length of 206, which is insane. The only problem is this glaive can be used with one hand, and the AI prioritizes shields over damage, so our companions get slaughtered without a single kill. If we remove the shield, all hell breaks loose. The enemy loses several Legionary in the opening salvo and continue to lose troops at a fast pace. In the end, only a single companion was lost. What a huge difference having a shield can make. When it comes to using two-handed weapons, there isn't a big difference between any of them with the exception of the two-handed thrust-only polearms. As long as you stay away from that hot garbage, you'll be quite happy with your companion's performance. Personally, I'm partial towards the glaive since, as we'll see later, it's also effective against cavalry. Before we move on to the next important section, I wanted to run a couple quick tests using javelins. Each companion gets a single stack of Jareed javelins with 5 in each, plus a couple more from the perks. The first volley is completely blocked by shields. Then one Legionary goes down and a few others take hits to the legs. It doesn't take long for the enemy shields to get destroyed and the vulnerable Legionary get picked off. Only a handful remain by the time they reach our lines. Unfortunately, javelins in melee mode suffer the same fate as the polearms from earlier. They do very little damage with each strike. Our numbers advantage still save us in the end, losing only 5 companions, but it should have been a flawless victory. We repeat the test but add the one-handed mace from earlier. We see a similar pattern with a handful of Legionary getting picked off before the lines meet, but this time our companions switch to the one-handed mace and clobber the remaining enemy. I paused to see if everyone switched to one-handed mace, and sure enough, they all did. I would also like to point out that Bannerlord has amazing potential for modern art.
What the f*** is that?
We still managed to lose 3 companions in the end, which was a bit disappointing. And for the final clip, a bit of a meme. If you can manage to get several companions up to level 250 throwing, this happens. It's actually quite disgusting.
It's a very nice.
Moving on to one of the most important parts of the guide, countering enemy cavalry while on foot. We'll be using the same weapons for these tests, starting with the one-handed thrust-only polearm. As the cavalry line reaches our line, a couple horses are stunned, but several manage to get a couch lance off, dropping 3 and trampling many others. Notice the cavalry AI doesn't retreat far enough back, and they don't have enough speed to do massive damage like on the first charge. But our troops are mostly ineffective against them, and our companions are grinded down. By the end, only 4 enemy cavalry are killed. We repeat the test with the same loadout, but remove the shields and allow our companions to spear brace. The enemy charge hits hard, killing 4 instantly, but we also take out 6 cavalry in the process. On the second charge, the enemy doesn't have nearly as much speed and actually performs much better against our spear brace. By the end, we lose all 21, but take 14 cavalry in the process. It's interesting to note that speed is the cavalry's enemy when fighting against a wall of spear-based troops, and they perform much better at slower speeds. Let's try one more test with an actual pike this time, 299 length. The first charge hits, and our pikes are aimed way too high to hit the enemy cavalry, and we lose 5 companions without taking a single one out. On the second attack, the enemy cavalry are moving so slow that our pikes don't even bother bracing. We give the charge command to see if it helps, but it doesn't make much difference. We end up killing 8, which isn't bad considering how poorly it started out. I included this test to show that long pikes do have a weakness: hills. The end of the spears are too high in the air to hit, and the AI doesn't adjust them downward for some reason. Now let's see how well a couple of the two-handed weapons hold up against these cavalry, starting with the two-handed axe. We lose 5 companions on the first charge, and don't inflict any casualties in return. Fortunately, the slower subsequent charges work to our benefit, and the two-handed axes go to town. We still lose a companion here and there when the enemy manages to land a solid hit at high speed, but for the most part they wander in, get stuck, and get chopped. In the end, we lose 17 troops and kill 21. It's a very close win, but compared to the other tests, it's a massive improvement. And as I mentioned before, we'll test the Glaive again against these mounted troops. We managed to kill 1 on the first charge and lose only 3. As with the other tests, the cavalry don't gain enough speed to effectively charge and get stuck in our massive glaives and lose quite badly. We lose only 7 this time, a significant improvement from anything else. It's pretty obvious that one-handed and two-handed polearms that only thrust are terrible at countering cavalry on their own. They do have the ability to stun the horse in place, but lack the follow-up damage to take out the rider. Spear bracing is effective against the high-speed first charge, but useless after that. Any of the two-handed weapons can bring down cavalry, but the longer, swingable polearms should be used over anything else, as they have the reach to compete with couch lances. Moving on, let's test both ranged options, starting with bow and arrow. The noble bow does the most damage, so we'll use that. Our companions begin their draw around 150 meters. Against shield troops, not many arrows will get past the shields. After several volleys, they take their first casualty, shot through the foot. Only a handful survive to reach the line, but they are quickly dispatched. No losses were sustained here. Now we repeat the test against the best foot archers in the game, the Fian champions. This archery duel begins around 150 meters, although at this distance, damage is limited. The first Fian falls around 115 meter distance, and at 50 meters, only 7 are left and get wiped off the map. Once again, no losses. And finally, we replace the Fians with the Vlandian sharpshooter crossbowmen. The crossbows outrange our archers, starting around 180 meters. However, at this distance, most shots don't land, and the ones that do cause very little damage. Looking from the crossbow's perspective, it's painfully clear how outmatched they are. They get shot twice for every 1 volley they get off, and sometimes the incoming arrows interrupt their reload, meaning some only get 1 shot off for every 3 or 4 arrows. The crossbows are wiped out before they even reach 130 meters. Let's repeat the exact same test, but equip the bound crossbow, the best in the game. We see our companions open up around 175 meters, but with little effect. The shields are very effective against bolts at these distances. Even at 50 meters, not a single legionary has been downed. The enemy line reaches our companions in full strength, far from ideal. Let's swap in the Fian champions and repeat. Because the Fians lack a shield, our bolts are landing at the max range. The first Fiend drops around 150 meters. Only 2 have gone down by 100, however by 50 meters only 2 enemies are left and our companions have run out of bolts and must charge in with their axes. And finally, crossbow versus crossbow. We see a similar result as with the Fiends. Although crossbows are much slower to advance and both sides end up collecting bolts from the floor to continue shooting. All sharpshooters are eliminated by the end without a single loss. Unfortunately, I can't recommend using crossbows on companions. In all 3 tests, bow outperformed crossbow by a massive margin. It's possible that crossbows are more effective from close range, but if that's the case, it's best to use 2 stacks of javelins instead. Time for everyone's favorite, cavalry testing. We'll start by fighting against foot troops. Cavalry do damage in 2 ways, with their weapon and with their mount. In order to establish a baseline of damage, we first attack without a weapon. The first charge crushes a hole through their line, killing 2 and losing no companions. The second charge we lose a single companion, but trample 11 to death. And by the 4th charge, all infantry are dead at a cost of only 2 companions. Now let's equip a polearm that can couch lance. The first charge kills 6, but we also lose 1 companion. Halfway through the 3rd charge, all enemy infantry are down at the cost of 2 companions. It's interesting to see very little difference with and without a weapon. Let's run 2 more and do the recap. Testing the 2-handed axe first. We get only 2 kills on the first charge, with most axe swings missing their mark. By the end, it took 4 charges to kill the enemy at a cost of a single companion. The glaive has a bit more length, so let's see if that helps. We see 7 kills on the first charge, and it took 3 charges to kill everyone at a cost of 2 companions. Overall, the weapon loadout isn't that important when going up against foot troops, as all scenarios ended with very few losses and all enemies dead. The biggest advantage is time to kill, with couch lance and glaive ending the fight after 3 charges instead of 4 with all the others, including unarmed. It's more important to have a good mount with high charge damage. For the final section, let's look at cavalry versus cavalry. We'll start with the couch lance. Both groups collide and 2 from each side are dead, but this time, instead of separating, they stay clumped up as if they were melee troops. The AI seemed to be different for cavalry when fighting against other cavalry because they didn't do this in any of the other foot troop testing. And as you can probably guess, our couch lance polearms do no damage as thrust attack weapons, ending in a crushing defeat with only 3 kills and 100% losses. We repeat the test with the same loadout but add in a one-handed mace this time. It's great to see the AI swapping weapons once the groups collide and get stuck on each other. This time only 3 companions went down, and one of those was from the initial couch lance clash. I already knew that polearms without couch lance ability would perform poorly, but I tested to see how bad. We actually get 2 kills on the initial charge, but it wouldn't get much better from there. Only 4 kills and a total loss this time. And now let's test the 2-handed weapons, starting with the sword. The initial clash goes really well with no losses and 3 kills. I was a bit confused as to why this loadout was working so well. It seems the enemy cavalry don't defend well and the swords are just long enough to land hits, ending without a single loss. Hopefully we get the same results with the 2-handed axe, but not quite. We lose 2 on the initial clash and take only 1 out. However, it does turn into a slaughter shortly after, and we lose only the initial 2 companions in the end. The 2-handed mace has similar results as the 2-handed sword. No losses on the initial contact, and a complete stomp with no losses in the end. And finally, the 2-handed glaive. A quick note, make sure you remove the shield from your companions if you plan on using a glaive. Otherwise, you'll get this garbage. 2 kills and 100% losses. Once we remove the shield, the results are completely different. No losses on the first clash, and no losses in the end. If you plan to equip your mounted companions as anti-cavalry, be sure to avoid using shields and take any of the 2-handed weapon options. With that said, the 2-handed glaive, or any swingable polearm for that matter, should be the priority since it performs well no matter what situation it's being used in. Looking at the other tests, the glaive performed well on foot, mounted versus infantry, and even mounted versus mounted, so it's a great value. If your companion only has 2-handed skill, then any of the other options will do well. I wanted to bring up a quick point about one limitation with the testing done in this video. You'll rarely fight against an army or full party of top tier enemy units, but these tests only included top tier units. It's possible that some weapons perform better against weaker opponents, but in my personal opinion, it's best to prioritize fighting against the biggest threat, which would be the enemy top tier units. If you've ever been curious about how much money a small YouTube channel like this one makes, click this video right here. A huge shout out to the channel members and Patreon supporters who make putting bloopers like this in my videos possible. Who is Chicoletta? My God! That's a lot of wheels.